bloodshed of the past nights is stained into Iran's streets. 3 weeks of protest across the country, hundreds of deaths, likely more, and thousands in detention has taken this country to an inflection point. Protests have been put down before and are being again. Bodies being piled onto vans, stunned relatives searching through body bags to find their missing, those shot down in the streets. With the internet and phone lines cut and flights suspended, what is going on is mainly beyond the view of the world. Anger and despair has brought thousands to the streets. Soaring prices, a plunging currency and an economic crisis, caused in part by Western sanctions, has morphed into fury towards those who run this country. The Ayatollah and the Islamic Republic. President Trump has threatened to strike Iran in support of the protesters and warned against threats of Iranian retaliation.
We will hit them at levels that they've never been hit before. They won't even believe it. I have options that are so strong. So, I mean, if they did that, it'll be met with a very, very powerful force.
But Iran is no monolith, and Iran's ruling clerics still have significant and unyielding support, displayed on the streets today. The Iranian authorities say foreign interference designed to topple the Islamic Republic accounts for the scale of the protests. With internal and external threat, they've now offered discussions with the US. The foreign minister saying any talks must be genuine discussions, not orders, and warning though Iran does not want war, it was ready for it. These are the latest and by some margin the largest protests against the Islamic Republic. Previous ones have brought only limited change. Observers fear the same may be the case as a result of these.
What I prefer is that a total change of approach by the Islamic Republic, or at least a total change of leadership, if the leadership is not able to make these changes, rather than and like gradual change from within, rather than international attacks or international intervention. But as I said, again and again, the Islamic Republic has proved that they are not capable of doing so.
It is hard to imagine two men with more opposing ideologies than Ayatollah Khamenei and Donald Trump. The future of 92 million people in Iran, as well as global security, now rests on their next moves. Emma Murphy, News at 10.
The Iranian authorities have seemed as determined as ever to put down the protests, just as they have in the past. But more people have been killed in a few days in this current uprising than in months in previous anti-regime violence. John is here to take us through the factors at play. John.
Tom, these ghastly images reaching us from Iran tell a grim and familiar story of a regime deploying lethal force to survive. So have the hardliners won again? Or is this time a chance for change really coming? Now, the Islamic Republic was itself born out of unrest against the corrupt and repressive rule of Iran's last Shah. The return from exile of the Ayatollah Khomeini to lead a religious revolution was a pivotal moment for Iran, for the region, for us all. In defense of their regime, the clerics now command a formidable security state that's crushed successive protest movements. The biggest, back in 2009, saw millions on the streets after disputed presidential elections. They were met by batons, tear gas, and eventually by live fire. And again in 2022, after this young woman, Mahsa Amini, was arrested for refusing to wear a head covering and allegedly beaten to death. Hundreds more were killed. This time, the regime is far weaker after attacks last June by Israel and the US hit nuclear and military sites and killed senior military personnel. Donald Trump is threatening action again. But can the US really bomb the regime into submission? Indeed, is that what the White House really wants?
Is this going to, the bombing going to bring the regime to submission to U.S. demands, to a nuclear deal, to a limit on missiles, or to the protesters' demands? Because the protesters want better governance, they want democracy, they want more representation inside the country, which are not really top priorities for the United States.
Now, Iran's opposition is famously divided, and not every show of support for the regime is staged. But Iran's 86-year-old supreme leader cannot last forever. But it's still not clear what comes next or when. Tom.
OK, John, thank you very much indeed. Well, let's go and talk to Dan in Washington. Dan, look, we heard what Donald Trump's had to say about this. Not the first time he's had to said such things. I mean, we saw in the 12-day war, didn't we, certainly what Israel was capable of. Its intelligence seemed to be extraordinarily good about a lot of things. What might US military action look like this time?
Well, the White House is saying, military options, are on the table. But I've been speaking today to a former US senior military commander in the Middle East, and he said actually their options are a bit more limited than you might think. I mean, they don't have any carriers in the Gulf right now. Yes, they have aircraft in bases in Qatar and other countries around the region, but more likely he thinks that they would do something symbolic, like launching perhaps Tomahawk cruise missiles that might take out some command and control parts of the regime on military bases, but they're unlikely actually to affect how the regime is killing protesters in the city centres. My colleague John Irvine has spoken to the US ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, and he also is striking a pretty cautious tone when it comes to the question of whether the US or Israel should intervene in Iran right now.
It's not necessary for them to lead something that is clearly being moved by the natural forces from within Iran. The Iranian people are the ones who are in the streets. They're the ones who are at risk and putting their lives on the line. I don't hear anybody saying that the Americans should send military action in because there's sort of a clear respect for what they're doing.
I think it is the Vice President, J.D. Vance, who's the one who's really pushing to give diplomacy one more chance. But these, decisions are always very finely balanced, Tom. We understand there is a meeting in the White House tomorrow, and ultimately it will be one person who will make that decision, the Commander-in-Chief, President Trump.
OK, Dan, thank you very much indeed. And Emma is here to kind of pull all this together. Look, we've said a couple of times, and we've talked often about how the Israelis at the start of the 12-day war did take out Iran's leaders quite effectively. There obviously are military targets they could strike. But as Dan was saying there, that doesn't necessarily impact the regime's ability to kind of send police out to kill people if they want. It's a pretty finely balanced decision and not clear it would be helpful even if they did it, right?
Well, it's an incredibly difficult decision, and it should be, because what's at stake is not only the situation in Iran, the futures of the people of Iran, but also the regional security and, to a certain extent, global security. And these decisions and where this goes are pretty much resting in the hands of two people who work in a very absolutist way, the Ayatollah and Donald Trump. And it's very hard to read which way either of them would go. I think it would be a mistake to assume that a symbolic hit on Iran would not generate some kind of response and that they are so weakened that they could not respond appropriately. I was in Tehran a few weeks ago and they were very clear then that the 12-day war was a good practice for them, and they acknowledged also for Israel and the US. But they were absolutely adamant that should they be struck again, they would see it as an existential threat and they would respond in kind. And they were talking about 2,000 missiles sent out in quick succession. That would be incredibly damaging if targeted on Israel or on US bases or US allies in the region. And that is what the Iranians have said they will do if they come under threat.